Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with the various mayors and dignitaries and the rest of you. The work that the Safety Council does is important work, and it's great to see everyone here today and to see the levels of interest in the different agencies represented. When the opportunity to speak in front of this group came up, as Tom said, we were interested right away, and the reason that probably I was identified is I was asked to comment during the summer on the debate regarding helmets, bicycle helmets, and some groups who thought that promoting bicycle helmets was not a positive. And it was an interesting debate at the time because on one side of the issue was people apparently choose not to ride bicycles because the helmets mess up their hair, which I thought was sort of a frivolous argument. But on the other hand, if people aren't riding bicycles, they're not getting the health benefits of riding the bicycles. So it became a much more complicated argument than initially was on the surface. And so this has become an area of interest of mine, and I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and what I want to talk about. So risk behavior, risks in our parks, risk on our slopes. There's a lot of risk out there, but I wanted to look at it from the perspective of how big is this problem? Who are the risk takers? Because we all have a sense of who they might be, but I think you might be surprised by some of the numbers. The gentleman over there has a 16-year-old. I have an 8- and a 5-year-old. And all of us obviously are adults, and we see people who are risk takers all throughout the spectrum. So we need to understand who the risk takers are so that we can start to address the specific issues that apply to the subgroups. Adolescents obviously are a big one, and there's a lot of new research that addresses some of the issues associated with adolescent risk behavior, and I wanted to discuss those. And then some perhaps new approaches or new ideas in terms of how can we address risk? What can we do to mitigate the risk? Are all of the things that we have been doing everything that we can be doing? And then obviously I'll take some questions. So my background is I'm an emergency physician down at Lionsgate. I've been at Lionsgate for around 15 years. I was at St. Paul's before that. So needless to say, I have seen the end result of a lot of the injuries and a lot of the risk-taking behavior, and quite a spectrum of that risk-taking behavior. We think about it, or in this format or this form, we're thinking about it in terms of parks and slopes, mountain biking, skateboarding, snowboarding. Risk behavior spans a bigger spectrum of issues. When we think about risky behaviors, things like sexual activity, unprotected sexual activity, drug use, seatbelt use, risk-taking behavior has a much broader perspective. And so some of the background that I have in the company that I started called Rockdoc, we provide medical services for a large spectrum of special events. We do rock concerts, we do raves, we do races. We do a large spectrum of things that expose us, combat sports. The lady spoke of a son with a broken leg from martial arts. I was the ringside doctor at the UFC when it was first here. We do boxing in North Vancouver at Griffin's. I was there Saturday night for a boxing event. So understanding some of the reasons why people do things are part of the exposure that we've had via our company, as well as the background. And then at the bottom there is teenage substance abuse. That's a risk behavior that sort of is involved in all of the other risk behaviors and makes them worse. So there's a wide range of risky sports. Mountain biking, of course, we're all familiar with, but there's a lot of other ones, and some of the social issues and technology issues that, or technology developments that are happening are promoting this. The Jackass movies, you might be familiar with, have glorified some of this behavior. And of course YouTube. And there's various websites that will pay people money for their videos of doing risky behavior. I would say October and November are my favorite months, which I think nobody else in the Lower Mainland would say, as we can see from some of the weather. It's the only 2 months of the year, and I used to actually pick up extra shifts at Lionsgate because it's the only 2 months period, just short of 2 months, when it's quiet. There's less mountain biking, there's no snowboarding, the number of risk behaviors drops precipitously, and we actually see it in our volumes of patients. And I know that the third weekend of November, I'm going to start seeing broken wrists and concussions from the slopes. And I know that probably around March, April, I'm going to start seeing mountain bike injuries. So these things are predictable. We know that they're here. I want to talk about mountain bike injuries just as one example and go through some of the numbers with mountain bikes. All of the sports have similar profiles. But I wanted to use mountain bikes as an example. These numbers are North American numbers, and this is mountain bike injuries that have presented to an emergency room in the United States based on their coding. This was from about a 15-year period up to 2007. So the range, 8 to 97 years. So there are older folks who are out mountain biking. 53% of the injuries occur in age 20 to 39, 20 to 39. So, you know, we think of it as an adolescent injury sport, but in fact, older people account for a large percentage of them. 80.8% male, which is remarkable. A huge preponderance of males in the injuries. 3.8 injuries per 100,000 population. It's a hard number to get an understanding of, but that's a lot higher than a lot of other sports. So there are some risks here. And even this is mountain biking, and one of our side interests is we do the Gran Fondo. People go out riding thinking they're going to have a nice ride in the park, and the injury profile of some of the charity rides is surprisingly high.
Do you want questions at the end, or?
Preferably, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's okay. Just going to throw off my rhythm. 67.4% occur in a sport or recreation area. So that's interesting, a bike park or a trail. That's where the injuries are happening. Interestingly, 8 to 13-year-olds, higher rates associated with motor vehicle injuries. So these are kids who are maybe riding to the trails or riding in their neighborhoods or getting involved with motor vehicles. So these are the North American rates. I'll tell you anecdotally, the North Shore rates are much higher. Obviously, we have terrific riding. People love to come here and ride as a destination. Our rates are higher. How are they getting injured? 70% are falls, 14% are thrown over the handlebars. You put those two things together, and those are the vast majority of the injuries. 26% fractures, mostly upper extremities and shoulders. Soft tissue injuries, that's STIs, more in the younger people. Younger people are more pliable, they can absorb more force, their tissues are able to tolerate more. Older people fracture. That's just the way it is. Lots of lacerations. When there's collisions, it's head injuries and facial injuries, which are almost always serious, and also cervical spine injuries. One stat that we are all familiar with the knowledge of concussions, 14 to 19-year-olds, more traumatic brain injuries than all other age groups combined. And these are mostly from collisions and ejections. Almost 5% of the injuries are hospitalized, which I think is an underreport, because these are based retrospectively on coding of the diagnosis, so they're going to miss a number of these injuries that come in coded not specifically as mountain bikes, so I think this is an underestimate. Again, mostly fractures, but obviously the traumatic brain injuries end up getting hospitalized fairly frequently. And interestingly, proportionally, the females are more often hospitalized. So again, males. Young males are getting traumatic brain injuries that are life-changing events. So this is a big deal. So what is it about adolescents? And I want to focus on adolescents because of that group, that subgroup of life-changing injuries. You know, nobody wants a fracture or laceration, but a brain injury changes your life. So this is not an issue of not understanding the risk. So education programs have, which has been the focus of injury prevention for the last 20 or 30 years, done a great job of helping teens understand the risk. The problem is they still do it. And all that an education program can do is increase knowledge. It can't necessarily change behavior. And that's based on some of the research. And also some of our knowledge. Despite best efforts, these things are still happening, the behaviors are happening. Why is this happening? Now that we have more technology to understand how the brains of adolescents work, we can start to understand that the adolescent brain is physiologically different from a child and an adult. It has been described as a reward deficiency. In other words, the neurologic structure of an adolescent brain in the dopamine system craves reward. They go out and seek stimulation. Physiologically, they are impelled to do this. It's not even a choice situation. It's much like an addiction pattern. When you see how a teen reacts to stimulation, it's very much like a drug or a gambling situation. Their brains are different. Their brains are different also in the influence of peer groups. So we all know that our teens will listen to their peers more than they'll listen to their parents. And that is programmed in their neurologic structure at that age. The other thing we know is that the various risk behaviors are additive. They're called risk clusters. Things like skateboarding, smoking, drugs, promiscuity, unsafe sex go together, and it's an additive effect. It's a multiplicative effect. It's more than an additive effect. So higher risk, more behaviors together, higher risk. So why is this? Well, if you think about it, it's evolutionarily adaptive. When a young male, and again, preening behavior or trying to attract a mate, or trying to survive, to procreate the next generation, being able to go out and attack that tiger is an adaptive thing. And the ones who aren't very good at attacking the tigers don't survive. So this is something that has probably evolved over time. And it's interesting, it happens at puberty, but it's not hormonally mediated. So they become, their brains transform into this state very quickly, and then there's a slow resolution. And we see that because the risk behavior doesn't suddenly stop at 20, and the numbers that we saw show that. It slowly declines as the ability to override those innate drives starts to come on board. And again, physiologically, what we see is what's called neural pruning, where you have a massive overload of neurons that suddenly start to reduce. And it's very much, someone described it as pruning a rose bush. You get tons of buds, but if you want a beautiful rose bush, you have to prune off the ones that aren't going to be the ideal sprouts. So that's the process that happens neurologically, and we can see it now with new technology. So a reality check is adolescent risk behavior is normative, and it's biologically driven and to some extent inevitable. So no matter what we do, teens are going to be driven to seek stimulation. So education is good, but we need to do more. We need to change the context of the behavior and approach it from a different perspective. And this, to some extent, follows along the concept of harm reduction. Some people believe in harm reduction with regards to how we're approaching drugs. Some people don't. I would suggest that this is a context we should consider for injury prevention, or at least risk reduction. So helmet laws, education, awareness, bike parks and skate parks, all very positive. They understand the risks. Imagine how much worse it would be if we didn't have the education programs. We need to be promoting positive stimulation. So our adolescents are craving sensation physiologically. What can we do to address it? Competitive sports, where we're putting this energy and this need for activity into a positive team sport environment, is one way that we can do it. Trampolines are a terrific way to do this. They add stimulation. They're also sport-specific skills that transfer over into some of these risk behaviors. One of the side issues that goes along with all of this, and the mayor and I were discussing this earlier, is it's much better in the long term to have our adolescents involved in physical activity in terms of their future health than to not be involved. The single biggest determinant of, the single biggest variable that is modifiable for chronic disease is activity. And Daryl mentioned that sitting is the new smoking. And I believe that to be true. So if we can encourage these activities, great, let's do that. I call it professionalize it. If you have a teen who's got an interest in something, embrace it, professionalize it, support it, help them to become better at it. And that's done by encouraging participation, by encouraging them to do it right, encouraging them to do it well, supporting them with buying equipment that's the proper equipment, appropriate bikes, making sure that they maintain their bikes properly so that they're not at risk for equipment failure. Planning and design, these are things like planning of parks. Where are the parks? How do they avoid traffic? Are there hazards within the parks? Are the designs encouraging injuries? And then of course safety equipment, helmets of course, but beyond that safety equipment. And one of the things that is close to our heart is proper preparation or support when injuries do occur, because they will. You know, is there a mechanism to get paramedics there? Is there proper supervision in the bike parks? Or at least medical response capacity? Are there phones that people can use? Engagement is one of the terms that I like to use. Engage with your children, or engage with the community to engage with their children. And not just their children, but the local community and extended families. Parental modeling is a big one too. One of the things that my wife and I focus on a lot is modeling to our children physical activity and how to do it properly. And to get out on our bikes with our kids and to show them how to properly ride and to engage with them and to mentor them and support and engage. Peer influence, as I mentioned before, is key. Knowing who your kids are hanging out with and what they're doing is key. And also supporting those kids indirectly. If their parents or their mentors are not engaging and modeling, then that's an opportunity indirectly to affect one's own family by interacting with the teens and creating a peer group that at least is understanding of the risks. And substance use or misuse is a key risk cluster. Obviously, these sports are best performed when not under the influence of drugs. So separating out those issues and focusing on, if you're going to perform these risky sports, you do it clean and you do it right. What you do on your other time is another issue to be addressed differently, but separating those things is crucial. Again, sport-specific training and really embracing. So balance is a key to the vast majority of these high-risk sports, and deficiencies in balance or lack of promotion of balance is important. And again, back to things like trampoline and gymnastics is another one. Gymnastics is sort of not cool, but can be made cool, and the carryover into the sports is really significant. Warming up, proper technique is of course important. There's something called a functional movement screen, which falls into the realm of injury prevention, which is something that is going to be very common. Looking at what are we doing, how are we moving, how are we functioning that is setting us up for injuries. Can we identify movement patterns before the injuries happen and start to work on injury prevention in a proactive way? And of course, from my emergency perspective, getting proper treatment and then making sure that rehabilitation occurs properly before returning to sport. And we all know of hockey players in the media who go back to their sport too early and get re-injured and re-injured because they're not able to protect themselves or to interact with the environment appropriately. So again, we need to ensure that our teens and our population in general is active. In terms of chronic disease, which is the epidemic of the next 20 years. Activity is the single largest modifiable factor, so we don't want to discourage people from doing these activities. We want to encourage them to do them in a safe manner. So in summary, risk-taking behavior is normative and likely evolutionarily pre-programmed in our teen brains. Education and awareness are important, but we need to engage and promote the positive stimulation that our teens crave. And this, of course, spills over into children and adults as well. We want to mentor and model for them and professionalize that risk behavior. And of course, ensure that they're properly trained and ensure that the treatment is available for them when injuries happen. Thank you.
We can take some questions for Dr. Gutman now, and so just raise your hands and I'll sort of steer that process. We'll start with Elise and work to her right.
I think that some of these corporations need to take responsibility for these mountain bike injuries. Red Bull, for example, is a high rate of caffeine. I think Red Bull should be under the list of substance abuse because high rates of caffeine are going to encourage more risk behavior. And Red Bull sponsors a lot of these events, and they should be, held responsible.
So I'll declare my conflict up front. I've worked for Red Bull a number of times, and their highest priority in the events that they hold is safety.
Yeah.
So they engage us professionally to provide their safety backup. So from the perspective of looking after their own athletes, they are very committed to that. I understand what you're saying in terms of caffeine. I don't know that the science says that caffeine encourages higher risk behavior. There's an association that absolutely, sports energy drinks are consumed by participants in risk behavior. I don't know that you can draw a causative connection. And so, to advocate that the company should be held responsible for the behavior of people when they're consuming the beverages, I don't think there's the same connection to something like alcohol, for example.
Right.
Having said that, it's an important point. I mean, who is responsible for the choices that people make? And my personal bias is that people are responsible for their choices. And as agencies, we need to provide the opportunity and the support that they need to make good choices. But ultimately, they're responsible for their choices.
I realized that I came across a study about the psychology of extreme sports and risk-taking. The problem is that they have found that if you take a young child and expose them to risk at a very young age, you're already rewiring that brain to keep going. So should we, there's so many of these mountain bike children, so if they're taking in children, even as young as 3, 4 years old, and introducing them to the trails, and I've seen videos on it, and those kids are being sort of, they're going to be adrenaline junkies. So how could we address that kind of thing? That's what concerns me.
Sure. So
I think the age group that they're introducing these kids to these kind of sports, the age of 8, 6 years old, too young.
So what you're talking about is neuroplasticity, which is retraining the brain or encouraging the brain to be trained to function in a different way or an accelerated way.
That's probably.
So there's a positive side to that. You're highlighting the negative side. There's a positive side as well, which is to say that there's lots of evidence that, for example, kids who are put on trampolines at an older age, which actually reduces their injury risk across the board. So there's an argument to say that putting them in that situation earlier trains them to be better at it and therefore less likely to have injury. Now, does it encourage them to take more risks or not? I think that's debatable, but I think there is reasonably good associated evidence, not necessarily direct evidence, to say that it may improve their physical and neurologic capacity to deal with those sports.
And that including like mountain biking and stuff like that,
Yeah.
on the trails?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, because ultimately, if you why do people fall? It's the environment, the velocity, the forces are outstripping their capacity to react and their physical capacity to execute the reaction. And so if you can improve their neural capacity and their physical capacity, perhaps it wouldn't exceed that capacity and result in a crash. So I don't think the true answer is no, but there is another way to look at that concept.
So we just recently started a youth drop-in in our gymnastics gym in the West Van Community Center. Further to what you were just talking about, I've been coaching gymnastics for 18 years, and I've found that kids that have started younger have incredible body awareness, and they're aware of their limits much more so than someone who's brand new, who sees what they're, sees what that person is doing and wants to be able to do that, right? So someone who started younger, it's easier also to take a younger athlete and teach them the ground basics. Kids that are already 14, 15, 16, they're not interested in basics anymore. They want to be flipping. And so, we've put in place, the kids that come in have to do flip tests, they have to show a certain amount of progressions before they're allowed to flip. We're loving this program. It's absolutely packed full of kids. But what I'm running into is a bit more of the bureaucratic side of it from other areas saying, well, this is super dangerous. You're having kids in a municipal building doing technically some pretty dangerous stuff. However, there are some, there are certified gymnastics coaches on that. 2 of them, we have a youth worker working at the same time to manage any kind of behavioral things that come up. But it is a program that was avoided for the past 3 years because of some behavioral issues and as well as the safety aspect. So my where I'm hitting a bit of a wall a little bit is people are really excited about the program, but they're super cautious because of the potential for injury in this setting. So it's I understand it, but at the same time it's frustrating because if you see, we have 40 kids on a Friday night playing in the gym instead of out on the street.
Right.
And so it's, for me, and it was really exciting to watch. I've been and watched a number of times, and it's very, you get really caught up in it because the kids are so excited. And I see that a lot of what you were talking about, just needing that rush. You can see it firsthand. Anyone should come and take a look on a Friday night. It's quite amazing to watch. Exciting, and I get that. And it's safe to a degree. There's lots of mass, there's lots of, but what they're trying is sometimes a little, it's all right. But, it's from the outside perspective, it's dangerous.
But that's the issue, is they're going to try to get that feeling.
That's right.
And so where are they getting it? If they can get it there, great. They're not out behind the mall trying to get in fights or chase cars or whatever it is, whatever negative activities could be happening. That's a positive one.
Part of it, the mentor aspect of it, you pick the right instructors to be there. There's one in particular, the kids love him. They ask for him as soon as they walk in, and he sets up, parkour area of the gym where they can, jump over boxes and do all sorts of crazy stuff. But again, he's a certified gymnastics coach. He knows, and he knows the kids' limits, and he's, developed a bit of a rapport with them. And it's all really neat to watch, but it is really hard to explain to, the outside sources that are kind of going, well, is this even dangerous? Should we even be doing this? So it's...
Well, and the understanding that this is an investment in the chronic disease, the diabetes, the heart failure, the diseases that are rampant and untreatable now, or 40 years, 30 years from now, this is the investment that we're making in those. And as a society, we have to make a decision. Our current healthcare system, and I live in it, is not sustainable. It just is not sustainable. And partly why I have a company is I can't spend my time at the hospital 24 hours a day because it's overwhelming. And so the system is not sustainable for us nor our children, and we have to make a decision as a society. Are we going to focus and invest in lifestyle, or are we going down the same path that has led us to an epidemic of chronic disease? So sports and active lifestyle is the investment that we need to make today for 20, 30, 40 years from now for our society to be healthier.
Richard and then Ken.
I think what I understood from what you said is that if you get them at a young age, you get them developing their balance and be better at the the risky sport when they get into it, would you say that they can still get that adrenaline rush now and be in a safe zone and not have to push it out to the, like they can still get that rush without pushing it out to the danger zone, where they can get like an extended rush or I don't know what?
Yeah, I think that's true, and that's anecdotally in my own opinion. I don't know if the research says that, but you know, you look at individuals who develop the skills, and then if they're particularly good at it, when I say embrace and professionalize, that's where you want to take somebody who is highly skilled and say, you should compete. And then their adrenaline is focused on the competition and focused on the structure, you know, and taking an athlete and putting them on an elite team, an elite hockey team, an elite basketball team. Then the adrenaline comes from the competition, and the competition and that stimulation is occurring in a highly positive peer group. You know, a colleague of mine said, you know, the single best thing she ever did for her kids was force them into elite hockey. And I said, well, you know, and I'm a hockey coach, and one of the most potentially toxic environments is a competitive hockey environment. However, she says, you know, when my kid has a game on Saturday, he's not going out with his buddies drinking. You know, this is a 16-year-old. He's staying home because he's got to play tomorrow. So taking those people and putting them in, you know, there's ways to channel that. So I think we shouldn't be afraid that they won't have enough stimulation and they'll go into higher and higher risk, because there's other avenues where they can continue to get stimulation by channeling it. And again, that goes back to embracing it and professionalizing and engaging with our youths and our kids and saying, so what do you need? What's next? How can I support you to get what you need, because I know you need something and I know you're going to get it. So how can I help? How can, as a parent, as a community leader, how can we continue to engage them and to help them along to the point where they're feeling satisfied in that need? And again, think of it in terms of drug addiction or gambling. You know, you can look, you know, there's stories of people ruining their lives on drugs and gambling. Think of that kind of motivation. How can you channel this in another way?
Yeah. I'm a youth outreach worker, and I engage people, and I think it was on one of the slides around smart risk, and that's kind of the working model. And I think I was hearing, and so I'm just trying to get some confirmation when we know that young people are going to take some risks at times, and I often want to sort of cue them around, like, what's your criteria for, you know, risk management, and, you know, is this a risk you want to take, and how are you thinking about it? Kind of, you know, trying to have a dialogue with them around, you know, so what makes you think you're going to be able to pull it, whether it's a stunt on a mountain bike, or, you know, and it might even be a different realm. It might be substance misuse or whatever. And it seems like the literature is saying that that's a good process and it's protective, and that I'm kind of on the right track with that.
I mean, again, I think so on a personal level. I mean, I wouldn't call myself an expert neurophysiologist on this or a behaviorist on this, but from my perspective, you know, the more engagement, the more dialogue, and to actually challenge and say, okay, I'm not saying don't do this. I'm not saying don't go and try that bike stunt, but just go through with me what your thinking is.
What's the framework?
What's the framework? Why do you think why do you want to do it? Why do you think you can do it? And what do you need to do to prepare yourself to do it? I'm not telling you don't do it, but let's work through how you're going to prepare to do it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to participate in this Barbara's presentation. I think it's extremely timely to go up here. But right now we're seeing in the media that the teen years are not teen years anymore, they're into the 20s. I think it's important, coming from an educational background, I was involved with the counterattack program for 20 years. And we saw through monitoring, mentoring, and showing them positive choices they could make, the number of alcohol involved or accidents and incidents dropped by 50% over a 10 to 20 year period on the North Shore and in BC. These young people were presented with material, they could make a choice and get the reinforcement they needed, whether it was in the classroom or in the community. Some of them went on to Cap College, women's college, and they started a counterattack program there. It wasn't cool to be substance abusive and be at the wheel. If we can continue to do this with our young people, especially in athletics, because they're out there tearing down the world, if we can give them some controlled situations where they're monitored, we have the modeling, and we can monitor it, we can see nothing but fantastic future in health style, in their lives 10, 20, 30 years down the road. We can stop these epidemics before they get totally out of hand. I think it's very timely, and I appreciate very much the work you're doing and the presentation you're making, especially to this, one of the rarest groups I find in BC that's able to have the outreach and the extension into the whole community and the whole North Shore. I wish the school board to get behind this and make some of these facilities available. If I were back here, I'd be back here. Thank you very much.